USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veteran stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
Okay, we're gonna
See what we got in here.
open up the cabinet.
Yeah.
And in here is just some memorabilia. My son made up a set of my medals because I lost the other ones during the fire, and then we did find them. So that's what he made, and these are the real ones.
Wow.
My son, Jason, all right, he's been in the military 23 years. He started off as an E1 and auto mechanic, and went up to ordnance, and I think he made E5 sergeant, and then gave that up and went ROTC, Black Hawk pilot. It's an older picture. Right now he's major. So yeah, this is the unit I was in Inshore Undersea Warfare Group number 4.
So what were you guys looking for?
Somebody saw something in there, you know.
And you just happen to have an 8mm camera and started filming.
Oh yeah, and I bought that also from Japan.
Wow.
You could, okay, the only thing I ever wanted to do was fix cars, so I started a shop when I was 15 years old. And I used to, parents had a community driveway, and they used to deliver parts to me down the driveway, and I would fix people's cars.
You were 17 there?
Yeah. So I went to automotive high school in Brooklyn. I went to school, and on the weekends and summers, I would always be working on cars. About 1966, 67, I started thinking about the draft. I had a friend who was a recruiter, and so I used to fix his car, and then I started fixing the Navy's cars. And I spoke to him, and he said, I can probably keep you out of the military because you're doing government work. And I said, yeah, but you can't guarantee it. So we talked about it, and I decided that I wanted to become a Seabee, not Navy, all right? So to get in, we filled out all the paperwork, but there was no opening for auto mechanics. But he was able to get the government and me to sign a contract that I couldn't be drafted, all right? But as soon as I had an opening, I'd have to go in. So I'm getting ready to go, and Hurricane Camille hit.
Camille's 210-mile-an-hour winds and 20-foot seas caused massive destruction that people have spent decades trying to describe.
The military gave me a bus ticket. There was no buses running. I called them up and I said, listen, I can't make it. There's no transportation. So they told me, we don't care if you charter an airplane, if you get on a limo or taxi cab, we don't care, but you're gonna be here. This is the orders and them paying for airplane, limousine, yeah.
That's great.
So we get there, 70% of the entire base was gone and 20% of the housing. So we spent part of the time cleaning up and, not too much military stuff. And then I went to NAS Miramar in San Diego. There came a day, December 22nd, 1969, and I'm just walking in a hangar, and 2 planes go by, and then I see a dark shadow and an explosion, and that F8 Crusader blows right into the doors and blew up right in front of me. I just ran in. That was my instinct. There was fires going everywhere. But my instinct was to go in and try to save people. But there was 4 or 5 fully fueled jet fighters right next to me in this inferno. So, but I pulled 2 people out, and there was no skin on their face, no skin on their body. I could see their heart going like this, and you think, you know, but the will to live is amazing. So I pulled out, you know, some people, and luckily the Seabees were across the way. They were showing Boy Scouts some equipment, so they had the equipment there. And they ripped off the other door, and then in came the fire truck, just ran right into it, and then people started coming in. You see the look on the guy's face?
Crazy.
And if you see the hole in the roof over here, that was somebody working on the injection seat, he blew through the roof. And then somebody else was working on the plane and got sucked into the intake, and we took him out as powder the next day. You know, you think you're going to do that and then just go back to your life, but you know, unfortunately, they come visit me all the time. Yeah. And I keep telling them, listen, I tried to save your life, why you bother me, you know, and this went on for over 50 years. From there, we went to SERE training. SERE training is survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. You know, it's how to shoot guns, how to evade the enemy, how to live off the land. And the experienced people are going to hunt us down, okay? And they tell you that. So you're going to try to stay away from them, you know, and see if you can not get caught. But what they didn't tell us is the command told them exactly where we were. Okay, no, so anyway, we began to realize that they're following us. So we go, and again, there was no food. And they told us about rattlesnakes. Be careful with the rattlesnakes. And I said, wow, that sounds good. So we found rattlesnake, we took a fork stick, stuck it on his head, and then we skinned it, and that was our meal. And in fact, the other guy got the rattlers, I think 14 rattlers, and I got the skin, and I stretched it out in California, but it still wasn't finished. So I carried that to Vietnam with me. Oh, this is
Oh, there's the snake.
And I don't like the picture of me, but there's the headband. So the snake went from there to Vietnam as a headband. I brought 2 6-packs of beer, Schaefer and Rheingold. And I brought them because I figured I'd miss it. And the snake head, the snake body, and carried them into Vietnam. And so I got out. It was hot. Waiting for me was a corpsman in a Jeep right outside the plane, and hands me an M16 and says, okay, we're going. This was in Cameron. So he drove me to this little place on the South China Sea called Inshore Undersea Warfare Group 1, Unit 4. I take my papers, I'm gonna be all polite. I walk into where you check in, and I say, Brandle, checking in, sir. And which wasn't me. But I said, I'm here. And the officer says, I don't want you. So I said, listen, I have orders to be here, all right? And I think the government knows more than you do while I'm here. And he starts screaming and cursing at me. The commanding officer walks in and says, what's going on? I said, I don't know. I said, I came in, I'm checking in. This is Brandle checking in, sir. And he tells me, get out of here. And then he starts cursing at me again. I said, see? And that's one thing. You never curse at people. You've lost it, all right? And so he told the OIC, he's staying, and you meet me in the office. I guess it might have been 120 people on the entire base, and I had to fix all the trucks and cars and get whatever needed to be gotten to steel or whatever, you know, and so went on. I was also a Navy diver, so I had the diving gear. I remember doing some diving, fixing the bottom of a boat, and they set off concussion grenades and like blew my eardrums out, you know, so that's why I have a cochlear implant now, you know. So when the EODs would come, sometimes I'd dive with them, but they used to wrap the pilings with C4, and so I get the C4 and you'd roll it like clay and into a barbecue, which is half of a 55-gallon barrel, and you know, we had built that, and instant barbecue. Yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting base. I loved it. And then what happened is we turned over to the Vietnamese under the Vietnamization program, and I was picked to stay on as a naval advisor. This is when we turned over to the Vietnamese, you know, the official, and that's the flagpole that I built, because they wouldn't take it without a flagpole. Now we had 8 Americans and 150 Vietnamese, and that was the entire base. And my job was keep the base running with my counterpart and teach them, you know, how to take care of things when we're gone.
Did you speak the language at all? Or?
A little bit. But, you know, I was learning, he was learning English, but so we did that, and, you know, we'd fix everything. Yeah, this is me welding, because I had to do everything on the base. So this is the dock, and it was getting holes. So, you know, I had to weld in pieces of metal so it won't fall through it. So this is a young me, and I'm glad you grabbed this picture because I like it. But this is before we turned over to the Vietnamese, and there were barracks. And I lived in one of the barracks, and this is just sitting there. Yeah. After we turned over, I got the American Red Cross house, and it had a big cross on top. Then it started that they couldn't supply us, the Vietnamese couldn't supply us with food and all the equipment. So we realized that, you know, we're gonna have to take care of ourselves. So I had a reputation for, they have comshoring and stealing. You know the difference? Okay, stealing is when you take something for yourself. Comshoring is when you borrow something for the good of the unit. So, you know, I used to go into Cam Bay. I'd go on supply runs, and I could sign for anything. So I'd get big boxes of ammo, and I remember dropping off a cylinder head so they could do the machine work. And then I picked up a bunch of Portland. That's all, they didn't call it Portland cement, but Portland. And you could trade that for anything. I mean, imagine being out there and not having cement. This is what I was telling you. Yes. Yeah. Okay. In here, what you see, this is a supply run.
Is that a stolen Jeep?
Okay. And the bags, that's the Portland cement, and the big box over here, that's ammo. Over here was the cylinder head for another Jeep. Huh. And I was bringing that in to Cam Bay for the machine shop to repair it. This was driving along the highway to Cam Bay. You know, so it's so beautiful. The base, we had like a clubhouse. So what we decided was we would start a bar, and all of us would put money in. This is Actually, in the club, that's AK-47, but I'm standing in front of the EOD's flag. That was their official flag. Then one day, the commanding officer said, you know, we need a water buffalo. That's the thing with the water, because it was contaminated by the Vietnamese. And I said, yeah, I know. And the head enlisted guy said, do you understand what he's saying? We need a water buffalo. I said, yeah. What he's trying to tell you, we don't care how you get it, as long as you get it. I just got back from a dive trip, and I'm refilling up the tanks. And I see a Boston whaler out, you know, way out in the horizon, and it's coming towards me, and I'm watching. There's nobody in it. And I said, oh, somebody probably filled it up with explosives, and they're gonna try to blow up the dock. And I'm watching with the binoculars, and I realize that it's American in fatigues. And so he's swimming the boat in. So I don't know who this guy is. So he pulls it over, we talk for a while, and he says, you know, I lost my boat engine. Would you help me find it? And then he says, do you know who I am? I said, no. He says, my name is Sergeant Keltner. I'm head of the entire 5th Special Forces Green Berets. All right? And now, because you're willing to help me without knowing what I am, you know, or who I am, he says, anything you want now, we'll get you. And so I walk in, you know, like cock, you know, like this. I got you the water buffalo. And where'd you steal it from? No, I did it legitimately. And you never do things legitimately. I said, but the thing is, the commanding officer has to call the head of the base. He was a colonel. I walk into the club, I have my commanding officer on the phone. He falls down laughing. And I said, what are you laughing about? He says, do you know what you requisition? Yeah, water buffalo. Yeah, but they want to know male or female. You requisition live water buffaloes. I needed a 1.25 ton Jeep, pickup truck type thing. I think 715 is the model. And I needed some other things. And I knew where it was. There was if you go on to the Army base, in the junkyard, they were hiding them because there was an IG or IG inspection, and they are not allowed to have any more than what they have on the record, and you can't have any less. So this was an extra one. So I went in and I had the crow on my hat, so they thought I was an officer and they salute me. And then they see that I'm stealing the truck. And so yo, you can't do that. I said, okay, what's your name? He says, if you don't let me take that, then I'm going to go right now to AG and tell them where you're hiding all this stuff that you shouldn't, all right? And so he had to let me take it.
Is this your Seabee book?
This is the unit, yeah.
The unit book, yeah.
There I am.
I like it. It's so marked up. I like it.
See, this is, which is people of the reason. The unit, it wasn't that we're supposed to fight, but it says we're there for the people. And that's what our job was. I would go into town, we would eat, you know, with the villagers. We would get potable water, bring it to the villages, we'd bring in food, we'd do, you know, all this kind of stuff. So, you know, we were very friendly with them. And, you know, they were nice to us. You know, that way it was good. The other thing, we were so small, we didn't have a mess hall. We had no place to eat. So they paid us, the government paid us to go into town, which is the bottom of the hill, and go to the little town down there and eat. Some of the guys didn't want to try this, didn't trust them and all that, but it was good. You know, I remember my favorite was the water buffalo steak cooked in butter. It was like, that was, because it's a combination of French and Vietnamese cooking. This was in there, trying to make friends with the kids, and here I am eating a ice pop that they made from fresh strawberries and stuff. It was so good. Yeah, that was me and Hubs. Yeah, he was another Seabee. So that was Dick Hubs and I, and we're showing off some of the stuff that we captured. But we were on patrol. We were told that somebody saw something in the woods, so that's what we did. We went looking for them. Mm-hmm. This is the Red Cross house. That became my quarters. They let me have that because I was helping everybody. And this was the lookout tower for the base, and that's our chicken coop. The Vietnamese did not want our chickens. They said they tasted like crap. They liked the range, and we were trying to show them how quick you can raise chickens because they'd leave them out there for years. I've been having nightmares for 50 years, and coming to the date, I relive every moment of the plane crashing. I mean, minute by minute. And, I really, it isn't like I went out and hurt somebody. I saved or tried to save people's lives. And I said, why are you still coming? And so I told my doctor, and he says, you got to see a therapist because you don't get nightmares for 50 years. So, so that's what. Then I had a house fire here, the upper floor. So the carpenter that's working on my house is talking to me, and he says, you effed up. I said, what? He says, yeah, you're effed up. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, you remind me of my father. Were you in Vietnam? I said, yeah. He says, talk to my father. And his father, I went over and talked to me, explained to me everything going on, and he actually took me by the hand and said, okay, we're going here. Took me to VA hospital to sign up. He's, did a whole bunch of things, brought me to somebody with the DAV, and then recommended I go to the vet center. And I said, okay, I'll go tomorrow. And he says, no, you're not going tomorrow. You're going right now, on the phone. So I went in there and I met Debbie, and I explained everything, that was going on. And, so I talk with Debbie every other week, and she knows, she remembers all the dates. I have certain dates that set me off. And, we right now I'm in a grief course. That's another one, but this was PTSD course to try to work on that. So they have the PTSD course, which I took, which was excellent. Then I have the writing. And the writing was just the most amazing thing because you tell stories. I mean, you tell stories all your life, but there's more to the story than you realize. All right, here you got a story, but what's behind the story? Why did it happen? And you don't, when you're talking, you don't get an opportunity to do that. And then there's other layers, and like, holy crap, it's usually about 3 layers of things that went on and why you did things. And, with the writing, it really was an opportunity to write all this stuff, and I have my letters from Vietnam, I use those, and just to write about my entire life. And I think this has been going on 6 years I've been doing it.
You proud of your service?
Oh yeah. It's what I wanted to do, and it's the way I got into Seabees was experience as an auto mechanic, got me into automotive high school, and got me into the Seabees as a petty officer. The same thing happened years later. I only wanted to open up shops. I had 2 shops, and then my wife said, look, if you're having kids, you gotta do something else. Become a shop teacher. And she said, I filled out the form already for you. you had to have a certain amount of years experience, all right, and you didn't have to have college at that point. You get to college later. So I was able to apply for a teaching license, and I taught for 28 years and chapter leader and delegate for all that time. Wow. And so that was because of Vietnam and the Seabees, and you know, each one complements the other.